Hello and welcome to the Indian Writers Forum. Today we have with us Sarayu Srivatsa, who's an architect and also the author of several books. Today we'll be discussing a very specific book. It's called Out of God's Oven, and it's co-written by with Dom Moraes, the poet and journalist. Thank you very much, Sarayu.
Lovely to be here.
Sarayu, it's a travelogue, but when I was reading the book, I also felt it's unlike a lot of other travelogue in its political intent to writing. Could you take us through some of the processes of writing this book with Dom?
Yeah, but to start at the beginning, I had published a book which was a kind of travelogue over 20 Indian cities. And then once that was out, Doordarshan asked me to do 13 episodes based on the cities I had visited. And at that time, Dom said that it would be better to do it for Channel 4. So we had a contract with them to do 4 major cities where the British had set up their empire. That's Bombay, Calcutta, Madras and Delhi, and was supposed to be stones of the empire. And so when we started traveling into these cities, of course Dom said, architecture is not interesting at all. Who's interested in stone buildings, etc. So why don't we instead talk to writers, interesting people and poets and ask them their impressions of what the Raj left behind. So that is how we went around, traveling and talking to people. And we presented the script to Channel 4, and of course it was not according to their brief. So, and plus the agent who had contracted us had resigned, and so it was cancelled. Now we had all this material because we'd done a lot of research, and then I suggested to Dom, why don't we expand it, visit some more cities and talk to people, the same format. And it was also the 50th anniversary year of Indian independence. So I thought maybe we could look back and see what we have achieved through people's eyes in the last 50 years. And that is how the book began. So it began really without any definite structure. We didn't know at that point whether it's going to be just a travelogue or just talking to a variety of people or talking to experts in various fields. The only thing that we had decided is that I, being native and have been brought up in a very conventional tam-ram way, and he being an outsider, maybe we could see the country as an insider and outsider. And then all the information that we collected was just possibly accidental, or it was maybe in the news at that time and people chose to speak to us about it, whether it was social or political or cultural.
There's one specific backdrop that I found in the book which was running throughout as a kind of commentary, and the backdrop were the riots.
Yes.
And the reactions that both of you had to not just the Gujarat riots as well as the Bombay riots. That's written in 2002, we are in 2017 now. Do you find some kind of similarities of the time that you were writing in?
I think when we were writing it, people were still not trying to be politically correct. Okay. They spoke their minds, they narrated things that happened to them or happened to their neighbors. There wasn't the kind of fear, or, I can't say it is fear even now, but essentially it is some kind of fear that they are not speaking. It's not a question of being outspoken or forthright or anything like that, but just like don't trouble until trouble troubles you situation, where they don't want to put their foot into it. And there are few people who are doing it, and it's worrisome as a result, So I know that when we were in Ahmedabad, and we had, somehow possibly, Modi was the chief minister then, and they had got to know that we were there writing this book, and they had assumed maybe it is against the local government, or this was there. So our rooms were raided at about 3 in the morning. And we thought possibly it is because it's a prohibition area, and maybe they assumed that we had people over, writers over, and maybe their beer bottles, and And it wasn't that. And they said they were from the police. And next morning, and they asked us questions, and they asked me, so where are you going tomorrow? So I said, we are going to the Amul dairy. Saying, why are you going to the Amul dairy? Saying, we want to see the cows. You know, is what we are going to write about milk. And they were quite surprised, and that was the truth. Actually, we were going to meet Dr. Kurian. And they were quite surprised that that was what was planned for the next day. And they assumed that we are going to do something else. And the next morning, we called the Times of India, and we also called the police chief. And he said, but we haven't sent anyone. So we didn't know who these people were, but definitely they were from some cell, and they were worried that we were, you know. And then when we returned to Bombay as well, we had some sort of, I wouldn't call them threats, but phone calls asking us to abandon the book.
Okay.
You know, the writing of the book.
There's, because you mentioned Ahmedabad and the raid, and it's actually there in the book as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's this lovely comment that I think Dom ends one of his chapters or sections where he asks someone else, why do you think this happened? I think someone from the hotel staff. And he says that probably because you're Christian. And
No, the thing was, they, Malika Sarabhai, when she got in Dilip Padgaonkar, he was in Ahmedabad that time, and they got to know that this had happened, because what Times of India did was put it in the front pages the next morning. And so they called a meet, and they all discussed that there is a cell that is formed for Hindus and non-Hindus. And the reason that you were targeted, because he was a Christian and you were a Hindu, and you all were traveling together, you know, and writing a book together, and you entered Gujarat, and they don't look kindly on something like this. So we were quite surprised that if this is true, it had got nothing to do with you know, the riots or whatever directly, or that we would write about it, but it had to do with social and cultural situation.
Okay, so let's now talk a little bit about the writing process itself. You've worked very closely with Dom, and he is definitely a very fine journalist, a very fine prose stylist, apart from being a very good, a great poet, one of the greatest poets we've had. What was it like in terms of the writing of it, in terms of going to spaces which really very few journalists even would go to, like the kind of spaces you go into and talk with interlocutors, with translators. But how did you assimilate all of that in the writing of it later?
Of course, we traveled together and interviewed people together, etc. But when we returned, we transcribed all the tapes. And then we sort of decided, of course, Dom would do this pretty number on me and say, I'm going to write about this, you know, like a little boy, you know, all the interesting pieces. He'll say, I will write this, Mahashrita, no, I will write. First he would say, oh, you write Calcutta, you know, it started with that. So I was saying, no, I will write Mahashrita Devi, I will write this, I will write. So you're taking away all the best ones, you know, and that's not fair. So we started, you know, looking at, okay, I mean, it's all our amazing interviews, but some are local people, you know, who what they speak about or tell us and their experience is more important than their name or their standing in society. And so we tried to share between, you know, we take so many common people, so many interesting people, and of course in areas which I would think he would know better, like cricket or some other political, you know, direction, which I would think he would be able to write better, or he thought there were some things I would be able to write better, and that's how we divided. But we also wrote chapters separately, and when they were done, we would correct and edit, you know, and with serious critical editing. And at the end of the day, we'd go back, and I was using the computer, and Dom, by then I had taught him to use one of those typewriters, you know, electronic typewriters. And by next day, I would bring all my 30 pages of that chapter duly corrected, printed and all. And then say, but how do you must have worked through the night. How did you finish so many pages? And that's when I realized he needs to have a computer, you know, and because our pace was not matching at all. I mean, this is a small thing, but I thought we're talking about the experience of writing together. And so then and I did realize that I may not be able to teach him the computer, because you can have only that much patience. So I recruited a student. He was actually studying to be a journalist, and he was attending the night school, and he needed the money. So I recruited his services, and I said, so during the daytime, could you teach him? So he would, but he was so much in awe of Dom that he had to submit an essay, and this was almost like his finals, about the Western Railways or something like that. And so he starts writing it in the regular essay form, I mean, they have so many carriages and so many bogies, and it was, started in this year and things. And Dom said, this is all so boring, this is not the way to write. So where do you live? So he said, I live in Bhandup, wherever he lived. And so he said, okay, you take the train from there, and on the way you buy this newspaper. And while you're reading the newspaper, there's something about Western Railways. So you read it, and then you're talking to someone. So through people and through that newspaper that you're reading, you start writing about the railways, And at the end, when you reach Churchgate, you come out of the station and flip the paper into the waste paper basket. And you have in the meanwhile told the whole story, and it's very interesting, So he wrote it, and he showed it to Dom, he showed it to me. It was really well written. And then a week later he came back, he got some 2 out of 10 or something like that, and saying, stick to the facts, we don't want to know you ate a banana or you talked to so and so, So, even though I'm talking about this person, it is what I wanted to share with you is the whole process of writing with Dom, because there were all these areas which needed to be looked into to be able to write together.
Since we've been talking about this prior to this interview, could you tell us a little bit more about now that you will be editing a book of Dom's travelogues as well as his profiles, basically looking at his journalism? I think it'll be a great, it'll be a wealth of reading for readers like me, especially after, say, Adil's journalism has come out as a book, and now I think Dom's will. So could you take us through that process of Dom, not just as the poet who's more often seen as an outsider, but a very keen outsider, I must say, who looks at matters related to India very, very closely. So could you take us through that?
Yeah,
this process?
I can only take you through, my experiences with him. I mean, many of the selections in this book are before I met him, so I wouldn't have much to say about those parts, but I used to be very surprised that when we used to travel through Bihar and all that, and he would of course buy notebooks, he would want to feel the texture of the pages and how the pages smelled and all that. And while we were traveling through the forest, he'll take copious notes, and I would really wonder, I mean, a green tree is a green tree, or, there are mango trees. I mean, you just try and memorize, but why are you taking so many notes? Or a cow crossing the road or something. And diligent writing even when he's taking notes on the landscape around us. So he said this is all for the atmosphere in the book. And we might tend to forget the flora and fauna later on, because we are going to be traveling over 4 years. And I realized that. I mean, nowadays what one does is just click pictures, but the whole attempt of putting what you see into thoughts and then them into words, that whole process is so exhilarating. Even now when I read into his notes and I realize what he meant by that, And also then when we used to meet people, there's so many interviews we interviewed about 300 and more people. And I had the recorder, plus I'll take down notes on very briefly what they are saying. And then at the end of the day, I will try and compare what his notes are. His notes would be, he has a way of twitching his fingers, and there's a little bit of gray, which is maybe greenish, or something in his hair, and some strange things, and otherwise there's nothing of what that man has spoken or, talked to us about.
Kind of observation. Yeah,
and then he'd say, he had a mustache, or he lit a cigarette, or, so I said, I mean, is this all that you've done? I mean, this is all? and it'll be like one page, you know, and then he had this very ant-like writing and arrows going here. It's like you've got so many pages, why don't you use up all the pages? But, you know, really conservative about how much space he uses on that page. And then he said, you know what, when you think back, you will know that, say, Mr. Brar had talked about this and all that. Your memory will serve you then. But what you won't remember is, was he bald? Did he have hair? Did he have a mustache? Did he smoke? You can't make mistakes like that, you know. And a photograph will never do justice to, you know, how he sat or what he was wearing. So this kind of helped me firsthand, you know, of how to, I had written a travelogue before, but, you know, certain things come, I think, instinctively sometimes, but here was something that he had practiced as a profession of how to write, you know. So that was, and then sometimes, of course, when he'd be very drunk, and I would think, I'd take copious notes assuming that he will not remember a thing about what happened. But his memory used to be crystal clear, irrespective of how inebriated he was, you know, which was startling. In fact, he would be even better when, of course, he would have his very cynical comments because of the booze, which was charming in its own way.
We look forward to the books, and thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.